It's kind of like watching the Zapruder film, right? The whole time we're going through this museum, it's like you want to just stay back here in the hopeful part. You don't even want to, you don't want to linger even in the difficult parts. You kind of just want to stay with the sweet young family and the hope for change and the popular policies and the shining faces of people like MLK in the White House. Like, what a lot of joy those things bring. But we all just keep pressing toward the eventual end that we know is coming in the museum. Hello and welcome back to my channel. And if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription. Today we're going to be going through something that I've meant to do for 6 months, you guys. My husband, for my birthday, took me to the Sixth Floor Depository Museum, or I think it's called the Sixth Floor Museum, where allegedly Lee Harvey Oswald was in the window and shot John F. Kennedy in 1963. We live in the Dallas area, but I had never actually gone through the museum, which was kind of crazy cakes. And so I just want to share those photos with you. So part of the delay was that I couldn't figure out technologically. I'm not a super techie person. I was like, how do I share all these things? Well, now I upgraded my phone, and this is my old phone. So I have the photos that I can look in front of me, and then I will be showing them on the screen with you guys so that you can literally walk through the museum with me. So let's do that together. When you go to the museum, one of the, of course, fascinating things about being there is just being right there in Dealey Plaza. So I definitely, before our ticket time, we went down there. I walked again around Dealey Plaza. I just refamiliarized myself with the distances between things and went and got in the position of Jean Hill and Mary Moorman, walked down towards the triple underpass, walked back up and around and through the grassy knoll and the concrete kind of little amphitheater thing that's there. I don't know what they call that section. But I just walked around there. It's always fascinating to go, and you can stand on the pillar where Zapruder was standing when he was taking his video, and you can see the national landmarks, and you can see various historic photos and maps that show you, and then there's a little X on the ground where the shots happened and that sort of thing, where the car was when the shots hit. So that's the experience in Dealey Plaza before you go into the museum. But then whenever it's time, you take an elevator up and you're immediately on the 6th floor, but you're at the back side of it, away from the street. And they have kind of a snake through pattern where they take you through Kennedy's presidency, through the close months leading up to the assassination. Then when you get up to the window, of course, there's window specific photos and all of that. So we are just going to walk through that together. So right where the elevator comes out, you are right by the freight elevator. And that was not in use. We're told that the Texas Schoolbook Depository, a privately owned textbook distribution company incorporated in 1927, moved into this building in early 1963. This pair of freight elevators carried depository shipping clerks and book cartons from floor to floor. When police officers investigating shots fired at President Kennedy's motorcade searched the building, they found that the elevators were not working because someone had left one of the safety gates open, so they were not in use. And so they keep it permanently positioned that way with it open. So that's what that was about. That's right when you walk out. Now, they have a photo of what the Schoolbook Depository looked like on the 6th floor the day of the shooting. And so that's kind of neat, just seeing all the boxes lined up. And of course, now it's all a museum. So, but you get a sense, and as you walk through, you see the columns and you see the beams, and it's still the same structure, but they show you like, this is what it looked like. They show photos of Jackie and Jack in the middle of throngs of people. It talks about his announcement for his bid for presidency and how their youthful style and enthusiasm and just the joy of that candidacy was very palpable. That his policies were not uniformly popular, and opponents believed that his social programs were inflationary, and his foreign policy was too willing to compromise. So, of course, he had detractors. But his popularity while in office ranged from a high of 83%, y'all, that is crazy high, to a low of 57%. And so right at the time of his death, 59% of the country supported his policies. That is wildly popular presidential politics. We get a photo of the Kennedy-Johnson campaign posters and a little bit of information about how that came to be. It was seen as a compromise. Johnson did not win the candidacy, and so Jack wanted to invite him. Bobby advised against it. They were elected. There was inauguration day with Jackie moving in to the White House. So adorable. At 43 years old, Kennedy was the youngest candidate in history, the youngest president in history. And so here he was with his young family, just moving into the White House. And it was there's this photo, adorable, of Caroline and John Jr. there with their father in the White House, in the Oval Office. And it did bring a sense of youthfulness. And there's this funny little cartoon that I just thought was hilarious. It shows two people walking by the White House, and there's one light on up in a far room. And they're commenting, and it says, probably a 2:00 feeding. That's the theme of that White House, was that they were just a young family. But they were not just a young family. We get this picture of the Kennedys with author Pearl Buck and poet Robert Frost at a Nobel laureate dinner. So they were not just some bumpkin young couple. They were a worldly wise pair that she spoke French. She was a real and true partner to him intellectually. And so they were able to engage with people just like this in meaningful ways. We have a quote that says, "This is the most extraordinary collection of talent, of human knowledge that has ever been gathered together at the White House, with the possible exception of when Thomas Jefferson dined alone." His charisma still resonates today. Just reading that quote, just me, a lady who's a random lady, reading that quote, it has such charisma because of the way he thought. He really was an intellectual. He was a statesman. He was many things. There's a whole section about the Kennedys as a family, and he was one of 9 children. We'll just walk through this photo from left to right. That's Rose seated there at the table. She was the matriarch of the family. Next to her is Ted Kennedy, the baby. Then Rosemary. She was the oldest sister, but of course had some developmental disabilities that probably were as a result of complications at birth. Next to her is John Jr., and he was the, heir apparent to Joseph Sr.'s political career. Joseph Sr. had his own financial and political career, and so Joe Jr. was the heir apparent, but he died in World War II. Next to him is Eunice. She became Eunice Shriver. Then next to her is Jean. Jean was the youngest sister between Bobby and Teddy. Then next to her is JFK, John, or called Jack. Just to the right there is Bobby Kennedy, or RFK, who was also assassinated in 1968. And then we have Patricia, and finally Kick Kennedy. Her name was Kathleen. They called her Kick, and she died in a plane crash shortly after World War II. So those are the Kennedy's children, 9 of them. And then we have other family photos. So this is Honey Fitzgerald. This would be Rose's dad, along with Joe Sr. and JFK. Honey Fitz had been a Boston politician. I believe he'd been the mayor of Boston, but other things too. He had wild political power in Boston. And so JFK came from a line of a political dynasty. We have a photo of anti-Castroites, and over here at the right all the way to the right is Major General Edwin A. Walker, who was arrested for insurrection and other charges during his anti-integration efforts in Mississippi in 1962. If you follow assassination issues, you will recognize him as the one allegedly to whom Lee Harvey Oswald directed his first assassination attempt. He lived in the Dallas area, at least had a house here in Oak Cliff. Some people believe the shooting was staged because it kind of hit a piece of trim and ricocheted. He was not at all actually hurt by these shots. It was only after the assassination that they said, oh, this was the same situation and all of that. But it's just interesting that he was arrested by and during this campaign about anti-integration and anti-Castroites. There's a whole section about the growing extremism during these times, pro and anti-Castro, engagements with the Soviets. There are photos of protests and problems and treatment of those who were demonstrating. From DC to Birmingham, there are magazines and photos all throughout this section. It shows the president greeting Dr. King and other civil rights leaders in August of 1963. There's definitely, as you walk through the museum, this sense of the hope of that like youthful engagement with the citizenry and the hope for change that came along with JFK, and also the resistance to that was happening culturally, that there's all these things that are popular and are desired, but there is a strong, virulent opposition to him. And so definitely building up that idea. There's also the nuclear test ban treaty issues. So things where domestic policies are in an uproar and also foreign policy feels fraught with potential problems. There's the Bay of Pigs in 1961. I'm just going to read this section. It says, in the early 1960s, Cuban leader Fidel Castro moved towards communism. When he nationalized American businesses on the island, the United States broke off diplomatic relations with the Castro regime. In 1961, President Kennedy approved the previously planned invasion of Cuba. With the help of the CIA, Cuban refugees entered the island at the Bay of Pigs to incite local riots and overthrow Castro. The April invasion failed. Kennedy assumed full responsibility for the foreign policy blunder. The Bay of Pigs fiasco was a serious embarrassment to the new president, both at home and abroad. Cuban exiles felt betrayed by this administration. Privately, Kennedy was furious with the CIA for the failure, and he removed the agency's top officials. That would be Alan Dulles, and I don't know the names of the others by heart. There's this famous picture of Bobby and Jack conferring under the White House porch in October 1962 during that Cuban Missile Crisis. Classic photo of the two of them. That relationship was one of those that was complex and criticized because it was seen as nepotism, but also for Kennedy's sake, because there was so much change in so many different areas. He needed someone on the inside that he knew he could depend on, that he could share his real thoughts with, that he could trust to be united with him and not undermining him. And so when you consider the weight of all that they were taking on, the fact that they were in it together is really quite precious. There was, I think, 8 years between them, but that relationship seemed so precious. And Americans really, noted that, even if it was an unusual choice to have your brother nearby. The Cuban Missile Crisis during 1962 was, of course, that time when there was the report hostile missiles had been identified on radar only 90 miles from the American coast, and the Soviets were refusing to dismantle. Kennedy issues the blockade, and Soviet ships are coming, and so it looks like potential for nuclear war, for another world war, and for massive foreign policy implications right off our coast. And instead, because at the critical moments, Kennedy and Khrushchev were sending private messages through trusted aides, they were able to communicate through back channels and move toward peace rather than increasing tension and hostility. That was a win for the world, and something that we still look back on with gratitude, that they opted to lean into communication and relationship and that statesmanship that Kennedy was so gifted in, versus increasing hostility and threats and ultimately leading toward a showdown. We're moving toward, of course, that fateful day. It's kind of like watching the Zapruder film, right? The whole time we're going through this museum, it's like you want to just stay back here in the hopeful part. You don't even want to, you don't want to linger even in the difficult parts. You kind of just want to stay with the sweet young family and the hope for change and the popular policies and the shining faces of people like MLK in the White House. Like, what a lot of joy those things bring, but we all just keep pressing toward the eventual end that we know is coming in the museum. There's the photo of the market hall, and the sign says, "Welcome, President and Mrs. Kennedy." And of course, President Kennedy and his wife never made it to the Dallas Market Hall. That was their destination, but it was not to be. We're also given a look at an advertisement that says, "Welcome, Mr. Kennedy," and it sounds really bright. And then it says, "To Dallas, a city disgraced, a city that's an economic boom town through conservative economic principles." So calling him out with a series of questions. Why have you banned showing of U.S. military bases? Why have you permitted your brother, Bobby, to da-da-da-da? Why have you, done this and that and approved the sale of wheat and corn? They have a list of criticisms for him. It says, advertisement from the Dallas Morning News on November 22nd. So a small group of local businessmen protested his policies and took out a full-page newspaper advertisement that very day. We're told that Dallas was the most conservative city on the president's Texas itinerary. His sweeping civil rights bill would have cost him millions of votes, and national polls showed that his popularity had fallen to 59%. I mean, even still, any president since then, I believe, except for maybe Reagan. Reagan enjoyed high popularity, and particularly after his assassination. But I think virtually every other president after there would be green with envy of a 59% popularity poll. Even still, he had opposition here in Dallas. And so there was heightened security concerns. There was heightened awareness because he had had other threats that the Secret Service was aware of. And so it says, on November 22nd, the general mood of Dallas became apparent when nearly 250,000 citizens came out to watch the motorcade and give an enthusiastic welcome to the president. There are layouts of the various papers that were initially planned. So, JFK takes city, Dallas greets president. They're coming up with potential headlines and have like a little line drawing of there's the president waving in the car. And of course, these would never be. These lovely layouts would not happen. We have the photo of Jackie and Jack leaving Washington. Of course, she looks lovely. It's a markedly different hat. It's not the pillbox hat. She looks beautiful and stunning. The Texans were super excited to have her on this trip because this was her first trip after their baby Patrick had passed away. She had spent time in mourning and kind of just letting her body rest. But this was her first official trip after that time, and she was glad to be getting to go with Jack. She just, of course, looks marvelous and fashionable. We have Kennedy, Costa Rican ambassador, and Governor Connolly meeting in El Paso in June to discuss this trip. And the trip to Texas had been planned and thought through carefully because of the more conservative nature. They wanted to shore up Texas. Governor Connolly was a Democrat. And so they had a series of cities planned to visit, including San Antonio and Fort Worth and then Dallas. I believe after this, he was slated to go to Austin, if I'm not correct, but of course he never made that trip. It says the Johnsons flew ahead of the Kennedys and greeted them in every city. So they were also in Houston, was one of the other cities that they went to. So you can just imagine this kind of whirlwind tour of like a few days where there's these core couples kind of traveling together, doing these big gigs and motorcades and parades and talks, and every time you're given flowers and the people are cheering. But it was a way to shore up voter approval in an area that was potentially at risk. They didn't want to lose Texas. And so they came down to do this. That morning, Kennedy goes out in Fort Worth to give a speech, and it had been kind of raining that morning, and so Jackie didn't come, and the people remarked that they were pretty disappointed because a lot of the women said that really the person they wanted to see was Jackie, which is quite a thing because everybody thought that John F. Kennedy was super good looking and of course super charismatic, but people really wanted to see Jackie. And so when she came to the breakfast, the Chamber of Commerce breakfast there was a lot of joy. A lot of women were super thrilled to finally get to see her. And then the mood lifted because right around that time, over the course of the morning, the rain lifted. And so decisions were made. The bubble would not be put on. People would have a clear look at the president. They wouldn't have to worry about rain. And as they arrived in Dallas, there was a large crowd and it was a sunny day. Oh, you can't help but see this photo with Jackie. She's eyeing the crowd and Kennedy is smiling and everything looks so bright and beautiful. And you've got the governor and you've got the vice president and Lady Bird, and nobody knows, at least depending on your theory of LBJ and his foreknowledge or not, but these people did not know what was waiting for them. The First Lady is greeted with roses, and I believe I've been told that this was the first city where she was greeted with red roses. So there's this great montage that shows the actual order of where the police motorcycles were going to be, who was in which car. And so I'm just going to let that play while we're talking so that you can see that. Very interesting to observe who was where, because there were, of course, not just the presidents, but there were Secret Service agents involved. There were other Texas officials. We have photos of them riding in the motorcade all throughout. Nellie Connolly, just before the assassination, while they were on Houston Street, which is just before you turn onto Elm, she said, "Mr. President, you can't say Dallas doesn't love you." And both John and Jackie agreed. They really were remarking all together at how Dallas had welcomed them. It had been, they didn't know what to expect, but it had been crowdfuls of people, like a sea of people between the street and each of the buildings. We're given this look of President and Mrs. Kennedy there on Houston Street, and it's just such a sad, sweet moment of the two of them. He's smiling at her, her back is to us, but there's such a wistfulness about a photo like this. We also are given a look at the Secret Service agents in the car behind. You can see each one of them, they're piled out on the sides. Normally, if you look up at the president's car, it's difficult to see, but there's a grab bar on the back with a little step where they could stand. And so there were places for Secret Service agents to be there on the actual car, but apparently, supposedly, President Kennedy had once said, "Let the people see me." And so he had been the ones to put them behind. But there they were behind. There they are smiling. Jackie looks so content. Everybody knows they're nearly to the end of this motorcade, and then it's on to a lunch at the Trade Mart. And Chief Curry, Police Chief Curry, says, "Approaching the triple underpass." And the police dispatcher says 12:30. So that was from the Dallas Police Department radio transmission. The next photo that we have here is the Mary Mormon photo. This is the woman who was there with Jean Hill. If you missed it last week, you can go back and listen, but we went through this book. JFK, the last dissenting witness, with Jean Hill. She was the lady in red standing right next to Mary Moorman, who took this photo. She took this photo, it's thought, less than half a second after the fatal shot. And so you can see him slumping down, and Mrs. Kennedy was already turning toward him, but then he slumps. You can see other bystanders across the way. You can see Mr. Zapruder standing up there on the pillar. And some people say you can also see a glimpse of the assassin. So that is a very famous photo. It was taken by Mary Moorman's Polaroid camera. I tried to look really careful, and I will say, some people say you can see actually the rifle. Some people claim to be able to see a badge for badge man, because there's reports of a man dressed up as a policeman behind the fence later. There can be lots of things you can see, because if you look in this area, it is just a lot of modeling. Modeling meaning mottling. There is so much there that is just modeled and difficult to notice. And so maybe Badge Man is there, who knows? I do think the longer you stare at it, the more you can kind of go, oh yeah, maybe that's that. But regardless, that is the classic grassy knoll photo. Then there's a photo of the motorcade coming out of the triple underpass. Of course, there's a few bystanders here or there, and we read through Paul Landis's account. He was one of the Secret Service agents, and he just noted a family that was standing on the side waving to them, who had no idea what had just happened, and they just are standing there on the side of the highway yay, we're seeing the president, and not realizing at all what's gone on. In the getaway vehicle, it says they reached speeds of up to 80 miles per hour. You also see that they have guns drawn. They did not know exactly what was happening, and they were taking action needful to protect the president. Then we're given a look at Parkland Memorial Hospital, where they came in and how they took the president to Trauma Room 1. They took Governor Connolly to Trauma Room 2. Mrs. Kennedy was initially out in the hallway waiting, and LBJ, interestingly, they led him through this long, elaborate labyrinth of little rooms, but he ended up at the very closest corner to the emergency room entrance, which William Manchester, in his account, noted that was actually the least secure place, because if someone was going to set off a bomb or do something crazy, he was actually in an extremely vulnerable position right there by the entrance, that in hindsight, they should have taken the new president, or the potential new president, up to a much safer place, rather than basically one wall away from the place where all the crowds were. At the Trade Mart, there's a photo of everyone waiting. One of my favorite authors and investigators into the JFK assassination is Penn Jones Jr. He was a local newspaperman who basically dedicated his life after the assassination and dedicated his newspaper to the discovery of truth about the assassination. He was one of the people here waiting at the Trade Mart, but there was not actually that many reporters at Dealey Plaza, because some of the reporters had gone to the front of the motorcade, but most of them had gone to the Trade Mart, because that was where the news was going to happen of the day, where he was going to give his speech, announce whatever policies, do a little, maybe glad handing, and so that's where they were all waiting. A lot of staffers were there as well. We're given this photo of Malcolm Kilduff. He was the White House press secretary at the time. He announced at Parkland Hospital, President John F. Kennedy died approximately 1 o'clock Central Standard Time today here in Dallas. He died of a gunshot wound in the brain. There is footage, I will say to you, of him. Somebody asks, and he says the gunshot wound just went right through the brain. He points right here at his head, which is what many who believe there was a frontal shot believe happened. That's what he pointed to. It's what the large exit wound would suggest. And so Mac Kilduff is an interesting figure, not just because of the fact that he gave this announcement, but because he was the first one to kind of give that analysis that later would be cut from that footage and would not be used because they didn't want that idea of this going forward into the population. There is this great video that I'm just going to link right now. It walks you through the perspective of the window and what the motorcade approaching would have looked like. That video, I think, does a good job showing the direct shot that would have been taken. One oddity in the museum, they have Lee Harvey Oswald's wedding ring, 14 karat gold, circa 1961, made in the Soviet Union. I don't know if Marina sold it. I can't remember. It has the markings from that, and he set the wedding band there. He put down cash for Marina that morning when he left. Then we have the coffin being uploaded onto Air Force One. We have conflicting thoughts. I think the case is cinched by Dallas Police Captain Will Fritz, but also don't believe this so-called evidence from Lee Harvey Oswald. So he was arrested, of course. Then also J.D. Tippit was murdered, and so Lee Harvey Oswald was accused of that as well. It's noted that Oswald had this membership card for the Fair Play for Cuba Committee. He was supporting the pro-Castro groups in New Orleans. There was a photo of Major General Walker's Dallas home found among the Oswald's possessions. Materials from leftist groups and his activities in the USSR were shown. That photograph of Oswald with the rifle that Marina testified she took this photo. Some people say it was actually photoshopped and that it might be any number of people's bodies. But there was then a variety of propagandistic materials in their home. We're given a photo of the reporters all crammed around Lee Harvey Oswald. Of course, everybody found him insanely fascinating. He insists he's a patsy. Then we have the shot. Of course, Oswald comes down to the basement. He's going to be transferred. Ruby has somehow gotten in. He takes the shot. He moves in. It's the first live murder that was carried on television. Many people watched it happening live. And then we have Ruby taken into custody. He was a well-known man to the Dallas police. He had deep relationships with them. Many of them visited his carousel club. He had a cadre of strippers and various underworld activities that he had his hands in. The next shot we are given is Jackie standing next to LBJ. She would not take off her clothes. She said, "Let them see what they've done." But there they all are, crammed into this, what sounded miserable, a burning hot little fuselage, very miserable. It had been baking for hours while they waited for everybody to get there, and he goes ahead and takes the oath of office. He wanted Jackie there. Some of the other things that are there in the Sixth Floor Museum are things like the outfit of the man who was handcuffed to Oswald when he was shot. We have Jack Ruby's hat. Just some interesting items that, for me, felt very much like getting the real look at history in the same way that I felt when I've gone on international travels and I'm sitting there looking at a sarcophagus, a real mummy's sarcophagus, you know, or I'm looking at real Greek columns in Ephesus. I felt the same about this, that like that's Jack Ruby's hat. It's his hat that he was wearing in that photo, that little video that we've all seen. Just interesting. I felt very grateful to get to visit the museum, and I thought there was some really interesting little moments like that, like the AP machine, things that I didn't expect. The other thing that as you leave the museum, there's a series of videos. There is video footage of the funeral march, and it's just looking at the photo of it makes me very sad. It's very sobering to consider his two brothers marching on either side of his bride and of course the two babies that lost their daddy. And of course they have the just heart-wrenching footage of little John saluting his daddy. And the whole funeral had been patterned after Lincoln's funeral. And so then after you get through the mourning period, then you get to the investigations. We're told about the Warren Commission. We are given looks at the various studies that were done of, could these shots happen? Can a rifleman, where did the shots happen? Let's measure it out. And there's this quote from New York Times journalist Harrison Salisbury in 1964, "The year 2000 will still see men arguing about the president's death." Yes. And beyond. We're in 2025 and people are still arguing about it, Mr. Salisbury. But yes, we're told all about the probes into the FBI, CIA, Secret Service, the Warren Commission, the House Select Committee on Assassinations. And the House Committee supported the 1964 finding that Oswald killed the president, but he concluded that he was part of a plot. So I just want to point that out. The museum is not hiding those things. The museum is not failing to cover things that are true in that regard. After Oswald's murder, 52% of the country believed the assassination was part of a plot. Yes, because if he makes it through the weekend, then he was the guy. But if he is shot, then someone's trying to shut him up because there hasn't even been any evidence. There hasn't even been anything, right? So there is, of course, the debate about the magic bullet and the various seating configurations and the jump seat and the where was the body positioned and all of that. So there's little figures for that. There's this footage of the Warren Commission presenting their findings to the president. It turns out to be an 888-page report. They have a picture of all the printed cloth-bound volumes that held their research. There is controversy about the autopsy, and so they go into that. There is the Rockefeller Commission and the Church Committee in 1976, and the House Select Committee, and the acoustical investigations, and on and on and on. We are given a variety of looks. We also have this great lineup of all of the cameras that were used during to take various photos. So that was kind of cool. It may not be the actual model that, belonged to that person, but they acquired those various cameras to show this one took this photo, this one took this photo. And that's a very interesting little lineup that they have that I found very fascinating. They have a collection of evidence photos, different passport things, and then a little map that shows the location of the various photographers that day. So all of that I find very fascinating, really well done. The FBI made a model of Dealey Plaza, and then of course we have the Zapruder film that comes to function like the clock of the assassination. It visually shows us his hands are up at this point, then he goes behind the sign, then there's the fatal headshot, and then he slumps. And they timed that out. They were able to tell this many frames per second and able to then have a clock of the actual assassination. There's ballistics evidence, there's head wound evidence. They place the fracture up here. When you look at the images that's so clearly shown in the documentary, The Destiny Betrayed, all of the medical professionals who account where the head wound was say the exit wound was here, that there was a huge gaping exit wound, and they all leaned down to show where it was, not up here, not like, oh, it was shot from back here and therefore it went out here. It was here and went out here, which of course means at least a second shooter, right? If there's a frontal shot, then you at least have a second shooter. They talk about the pristine bullet. There's various videos that you get to see, including the first showing of the Zapruder film with Geraldo Rivera and Robert Grodin. So great evidence, great videos, lots of photos, and I am telling you, and they even go into this, like what I was talking about the photographic evidence of there being potential manipulation. Lee Harvey Oswald, when he saw that photo, he said, that's been altered. That's not the real photo. So, you know, they go into that and show, like, is that possible? In the shadows of the chin, was that possible at the time? So I had to give them respect that I think they did a fine job of showing some of the contrasting position to the Oswald and Oswald alone perspective. The photo that perhaps is the most damning in this whole selection is the one by Phil Willis, where there is if you look at the unenhanced photograph, there is a dark shadow behind the wall of the grassy knoll, right where many of the people said happened, where the puff of smoke came out, and then there's reports that a little cloud of smoke hung right there under the tree for some number of seconds. Some people reported seeing a gunman there. And this photo, the enhanced version, does show a darkened figure there. So that one seemed to me to be the most damning photo in that regard. I'll put those up here, but that is worth your notation. So I felt that they gave reasonable space and time to the conspiracy theories. And I think that they did a reasonable job of showing that. I honestly was expecting none. So I was very surprised to see the quantity that there is of concerns. They also had a timeline of when certain information was known to the public. So really, and then they go through the potential who did it. Soviet government KGB, the Cuban government, investigative agencies, the New Orleans scenario, anti-Castro elements, the far right, they show that wanted for treason ad, organized crime, Jack Ruby, Oswald's motive, etc. There was even a dig up of Oswald's body in the 80s to determine if he was actually even buried there. They concluded that he was. The civil rights issue, the problems coming up with Vietnam, space, the Peace Corps. Like, he had a lot of enemies, y'all. He really did. And we have this final photo of him bowed in the Oval Office. You just see this young man, like, burdened with the weight of the world on his shoulders. And you know, all of us know he's not a perfect figure, but what an image, what a president, to have that popularity, to have all of these issues that you're navigating and be navigating them with such support from the American people. 59%. You can hardly get 59% of the people to agree on anything. So for him to be navigating that many controversies and retain 59% popularity is remarkable. So they deal with his legacy, they give the final look, and then you go around by the back corner and they show the rifle location where it was found, stashed near the stairs. They have the same type of gun, but it's not the gun that they say fired the shots. They also show the lunchroom, they show models of the buildings, floors, and what was on each floor. And that gets us through the Sixth Floor Museum. One of the things that I noted as I was leaving was that you got this great look at the rail yard. And so I'm going to include that right now as well so y'all can see that, because that building there is where one of the key witnesses that said he saw activity behind the grassy knoll fence, he was standing in that building, and you can see it's not far, and it would have a look right at the activity on Elm Street and the things going on behind the grassy knoll. It was in the ideal location for that. So anyway, I took that video for you guys, and then at down in the gift shop, there's remarkable things. It's really fun. But that was my walkthrough of the Sixth Floor Museum. I hope you enjoyed it with me. Let me know what stood out to you. Let me know if there was new information or things you didn't expect. And I can't wait to hear your comments. I'm so glad to be able to share it with you finally, because I'd been waiting for my little lack of technology skills to allow me to share it with you. So I feel very delighted to have gotten through this and to be able to share these things with you. I hope you have a great day. Bye.